The train platform at Cedar Crossing fell silent the moment Evelyn Ward stepped down, the fourth mail-order bride, the one nobody wanted. 3 younger women had already been claimed by eager husbands, but when Evelyn's worn boots touched the wooden planks, the man who'd promised to marry her was nowhere in sight. Whispers cut through the crowd like winter wind. Too old, too plain, abandoned before she even arrived. She stood there clutching a letter full of lies, watching the town's pity turn to scorn, until a small voice shattered everything. "That's her," a little girl cried out, pointing with absolute certainty. "That's my mama." In that moment, the unwanted bride and the motherless child locked eyes, and Cedar Crossing would never be the same. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale of second chances travels. The morning sun broke over the prairie in sheets of gold, but Evelyn Ward barely noticed. She pressed her face against the train window, watching the endless grassland roll past, her reflection staring back with tired blue eyes that had seen too many disappointments. The letter crinkled in her coat pocket. She'd read Charles Dent's words so many times the paper had gone soft at the creases. "Come to Cedar Crossing," he'd written in careful script. "I'm a man of means seeking a capable wife. You'll want for nothing." She'd believed him because she'd needed to believe someone. At 30 years old, Evelyn had learned that the world had little patience for unmarried women past their prime. The war had taken the good men, left the rest damaged or dead, and the years after had been a slow march of closed doors and turned backs. She'd worked as a seamstress in Philadelphia, as a cook in Baltimore, as a laundress in Richmond, always moving, always one step ahead of landlords demanding rent she couldn't quite scrape together. Charles Dent's letter had arrived like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. She'd spent her last $37 on the train ticket west. Now, as Cedar Crossing appeared on the horizon, a collection of false-fronted buildings scattered along the railroad tracks like dice thrown by an absent god, Evelyn felt her stomach clench with an old, familiar fear. The fear of being unwanted. The fear of being exactly what she'd always been. Not quite enough. The train lurched to a halt with a screech of brakes and a cloud of steam. Through the window, Evelyn could see the platform crowded with people. Men in work clothes and Sunday hats, women in calico dresses, children darting between adults like minnows in a stream. 3 other women stood from their seats in the passenger car, smoothing their skirts, checking their hair in small mirrors. Mail-order brides. All of them. Evelyn had watched them during the journey, noticed how young they were, how their eyes still held that bright spark of possibility. Sarah Mitchell couldn't be more than 19, with golden curls and a laugh that turned men's heads. Rebecca Stone was perhaps 22, dark-eyed and confident, already scanning the platform like she was choosing rather than being chosen. Even Martha Green, plain and practical at 25, had the bloom of youth still on her cheeks. Then there was Evelyn. 30 years old, brown hair streaked with early gray, hands rough from work, dress patched in places she hoped wouldn't show. She'd tried to make herself presentable, washed her face in the basin at the last stop, pinned her hair up neat, wore her only good dress, but she knew what the mirror showed. A woman past her prime, worn down by years of scraping by, marked by the kind of hard living that left lines around the eyes and a permanent tiredness in the bones. "Ladies," the conductor called out, opening the door. "Cedar Crossing, end of the line for you." Evelyn let the others go first. She watched through the window as Sarah stepped onto the platform and was immediately greeted by a young rancher who swept his hat off and offered his arm like he'd won a prize. The crowd applauded. Rebecca descended next, and a silver-haired merchant stepped forward with a bouquet of wildflowers, his face splitting into a smile of pure relief. More applause. Martha was claimed by a broad-shouldered farmer who looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever muttered. 3 brides. 3 happy endings before Evelyn even stood up. She gathered her carpet bag, everything she owned fit inside it, and made her way to the door on legs that felt like water. The conductor offered his hand to help her down, and she took it, grateful for the steadiness. Her boots hit the platform, and she looked up into a sea of faces. They were all staring. Evelyn scanned the crowd, searching for Charles Dent. She'd never seen his photograph, but he'd described himself, tall, dark-haired, well-dressed. Her eyes passed over farmers and shopkeepers, ranch hands and railroad workers, But none of them stepped forward. None of them moved at all. The silence stretched like taffy, sticky and uncomfortable. Evelyn felt heat crawling up her neck, felt the weight of all those eyes measuring her and finding her lacking. She clutched her carpetbag tighter, the letter in her pocket suddenly feeling like an anchor dragging her down. "Where's Charles Dent?" she asked, her voice smaller than she'd intended. "Is Charles Dent here?" A woman near the front of the crowd, flower on her apron, gray in her hair, leaned toward her neighbor and whispered something behind her hand. The whisper spread like ripples in a pond. Evelyn caught fragments. "Too old." Not what he ordered. Probably changed his mind. Shame burned through her chest. She'd felt this before, this particular flavor of humiliation, being assessed and dismissed, being found wanting in the most public way possible. But never quite like this, never with a whole town watching. "I have a letter," Evelyn said, louder now, pulling the worn paper from her pocket. "From Charles Dent. He asked me to come. He said—" "Charles Dent ain't here, ma'am." The voice belonged to an older man in a sheriff's badge, his face weathered as old leather. His eyes weren't unkind, but they held pity, which was somehow worse. "Haven't seen him in weeks. Heard he might have gone to Denver." The platform seemed to tilt beneath Evelyn's feet. "Denver," she repeated, the word hollow. "But he wrote me. He asked me to come." "I'm sure he did, ma'am." The sheriff's tone was gentle in the way people spoke to children and lunatics. "Charles has a habit of making promises he don't keep. You wouldn't be the first person he's disappointed." The crowd was beginning to disperse now, the show over, the entertainment concluded. The happy brides and their new husbands were already walking away, making plans, starting lives. Evelyn stood alone on the platform, her carpetbag at her feet, $37 spent on a promise that had evaporated like morning dew. She became aware of the whispers again, louder now that people were moving past her. Poor thing. Should have known better. At her age, what did she expect? Somebody ought to put her back on the train. Where would she even go? Not our problem. Evelyn stared at the train, already beginning to pull away, steam billowing white against the blue sky. She'd spent every cent getting here. There was no going back, nowhere to return to, no home waiting. She was 30 years old and stranded in a town where she'd just been publicly rejected, holding a letter from a man who'd lied to her face through the mail. The platform was nearly empty now. Just a few stragglers, the station master checking his pocket watch, a woman with a basket hurrying toward town. Evelyn bent to pick up her carpetbag, her movements mechanical, her mind racing through impossible calculations. How long would her last $2 last? Where would she sleep tonight? What kind of work could she find in a town that had just watched her be abandoned? That's when she heard it. That's her. The voice was small but absolutely certain. Evelyn looked up to see a little girl standing at the edge of the platform, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a faded blue dress that had been patched so many times it was more patches than original fabric. The child had dark hair tangled around her thin shoulders and eyes the color of creek water in summer, gray-green and startlingly bright in her pale face. The girl was pointing directly at Evelyn. "That's my mama," the child said, louder now, her voice ringing across the platform with the kind of conviction that made people stop and turn. "That's her. I told you she'd come." Evelyn froze. Around her, the few remaining people on the platform stopped moving, stopped talking, stopped breathing. The girl was walking toward her now, her bare feet making no sound on the wooden planks, her eyes never leaving Evelyn's face. "Lily!" A man's voice rough with anger and something that might have been fear. "Lily Mercer, you get back here right now!" But the girl, Lily, didn't stop. She walked right up to Evelyn and stared up at her with those strange, bright eyes, and Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest, something she'd locked away years ago because hoping hurt too much. "You came," Lily whispered, wonder in her voice. "I knew you would. I saw you in my dreams standing just like this, with that bag and that blue coat. You're supposed to be here. You're supposed to be my mama." Evelyn couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't think beyond the weight of this child's certainty, the absolute faith shining in her young face. "Lily!" The man was closer now, boots heavy on the platform. "I told you—" He stopped mid-sentence when he reached them, and Evelyn looked up into the most arresting face she'd ever seen. Not handsome in any conventional sense, too hard-edged for that, too marked by whatever storms he'd weathered, but striking. Storm-gray eyes beneath dark brows, a jaw shadowed with stubble, shoulders broad beneath a work shirt that had seen better days. He couldn't have been more than 35, but he carried himself like a man who'd lived twice that long. "I apologize, ma'am," he said, his voice carefully controlled, though tension radiated from him like heat from a stove. "My daughter has an active imagination. She didn't mean to bother you." "She's not bothering me," Evelyn heard herself say. Grant Mercer, she assumed this was him, looked at her properly for the first time, and she saw something flicker in those gray eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition of what she was. The unwanted bride, the woman nobody claimed, standing here with everything she owned in one worn bag. "Lily, apologize and let the lady be on her way," Grant said, but there was no conviction in it. They all knew Evelyn wasn't on her way anywhere. "But Papa," Lily said, not taking her eyes off Evelyn's face. "She's the one. From my dream. She's supposed to stay with us. She's supposed to—" "That's enough." Grant's voice went sharp, and the girl flinched. He immediately looked like he regretted it, but he didn't soften. "We're going home. Now." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move. She reached out and took Evelyn's hand, her small fingers wrapping around Evelyn's work-roughened palm, and held on tight. "Please," the child whispered, "please don't go." Evelyn felt every eye on the platform turn toward this moment. The station master paused in his duties. The sheriff, still lingering nearby, took a step closer. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Lily," Grant said, gentler now, but with steel underneath. "Let go." "No." Lily's voice was small but stubborn. "She's supposed to stay. I know it. God told me in my dream. He said he was sending someone to help us, and I saw her. I saw her exactly like this." Grant Mercer closed his eyes for a moment, and Evelyn saw exhaustion settle over him like a heavy coat. When he opened them again, he looked at Evelyn with something that might have been apology, might have been resignation. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "My wife died 2 years ago. She's been having these dreams. The doctor says it's grief, that children make up stories to fill the empty spaces. I've tried to explain that people don't just appear because you wish hard enough, but, Papa, I'm not making it up." Lily's voice cracked. "I saw her. I saw her face and her coat and the way she stands and—" "Lily, that's enough." Grant's patience was wearing thin. "This lady has her own life, her own plans. We can't just—" "Actually," Evelyn said, the word coming out before she'd fully formed the thought, "I don't. Have plans, I mean. The man who was supposed to meet me isn't here. I have nowhere to go." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Grant stared at her, something unreadable crossing his face. The sheriff shifted his weight, leather creaking. Lily's hand tightened around Evelyn's fingers. "That's not my problem," Grant said finally, but his voice had lost its edge. "I know it's not." Evelyn lifted her chin, met his eyes directly. "I'm not asking you for anything. I'm just stating a fact. Charles Dent isn't here. I spent everything I had to come west. So when your daughter says I should stay, well," she looked down at Lily, at those bright, desperate eyes. "It's not the strangest thing that's happened to me today." Grant Mercer looked at his daughter, then at Evelyn, then at the empty platform behind them. A muscle worked in his jaw. "There's a boarding house in town," he said. "Mrs. Patterson takes in travelers. It's not fancy, but—" "No, she doesn't." The sheriff's voice cut in, apologetic but firm. "Not anymore. Not since the incident with that drifter last month. She's only taking established boarders now, and only men. No offense, ma'am," he added, nodding at Evelyn, "but an unclaimed mail-order bride. Mrs. Patterson won't risk the scandal." Evelyn felt the last of her hope crumble. "I see. There's got to be somewhere," Grant said, frustration creeping into his voice. "The hotel—" "Burned down in April," the sheriff said. "Won't be rebuilt until next spring. Then the church—" "Father Thomas is in Denver until Sunday. Churches locked up tight. Grant Mercer stood there, trapped between his daughter's pleading eyes and this stranger's impossible situation, and Evelyn could see him calculating, weighing, trying to find a way out of this moment that didn't make him the villain of the story. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Evelyn looked up to see dark clouds rolling in from the west, building like mountains in the sky. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. "Storm's coming," the sheriff observed unnecessarily. "Big one, by the looks of it." Lily tugged on her father's sleeve. "Papa, we can't leave her here. We can't." "Lily, Mama wouldn't have left her." The words were quiet but devastating. "Mama would have helped." Grant Mercer's face went carefully blank, but Evelyn saw something twist behind his eyes. He looked at his daughter, then at Evelyn, then at the storm building overhead. She watched him fight with himself, watched duty and desire and grief and frustration all war across his features. "One night," he said finally, the words coming out rough. "You can stay one night, until this storm passes and we figure out something, but that's all, just one night." "Papa!" Lily's face lit up like sunrise. "One night, Lily. Don't make it into more than it is." He turned to Evelyn, his expression guarded. "I have a small cottage at the edge of town. There's a spare room. It's barely more than a closet, but it's dry. You can stay there tonight, and tomorrow we'll find you proper accommodations." Evelyn knew charity when she heard it, knew pity when it stood in front of her wearing a carpenter's work shirt and a scowl. But she also knew desperation, knew what it felt like to have no other options, and right now her pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll work for it. I can cook, clean, mend clothes. I won't be a burden." "It's one night," Grant repeated like he was convincing himself. "You'll be gone by tomorrow." But Lily was already pulling Evelyn toward the steps, chattering about the cottage and her room and the creek behind the house, and Evelyn let herself be led, clutching her carpet bag and trying not to think about tomorrow, trying not to wonder what happened to unwanted brides who stayed one night and had nowhere to go when morning came. Grant Mercer's cottage sat at the eastern edge of Cedar Crossing, where the town's neat grid of streets gave way to open prairie. It was small, just 3 rooms and a loft, but solidly built, with real glass windows and a stone chimney that spoke of a craftsman's hand. The yard was bare dirt swept clean, a chicken coop leaning slightly to one side, a vegetable garden struggling in the summer heat. Evelyn followed Grant and Lily through the front door into a main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and living space all at once. A black stove squatted in one corner, a rough-hewn table with 4 mismatched chairs in the center, a worn settee against one wall. Everything was clean but spare, functional but cheerless. The room had the hollow feeling of a place where people existed but didn't quite live. "Spare rooms through there," Grant said, nodding toward a door barely wider than Evelyn's shoulders. "Like I said, it's small, but the roof doesn't leak." "It's perfect," Evelyn said, because what else could she say? Lily was already tugging her toward the room, bouncing on her toes with excitement. "You can put your things on the chair, and there's a blanket in the chest, and Papa made the bed frame himself, and—" "Lily, let the lady breathe." Grant's voice was gentle now, the edge worn away. "Go fetch water from the pump. We'll need extra if Miss Ward wants to wash up." "It's Mrs. Ward, actually," Evelyn said without thinking, then immediately regretted it. "I mean, I was married, briefly. He died. During the war. I've used my maiden name for so long, I forget sometimes." Grant's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition of shared loss. "Mrs. Ward, then," he said. "Lily, water. Now." The girl scampered off, and suddenly Evelyn was alone with Grant Mercer in his kitchen, the air between them thick with everything unspoken. Outside, the storm was building, the sky gone the color of old bruises. "I'll make supper," Evelyn said, needing something to do with her hands, needing to be useful. "If you'll allow it." "You don't have to." "I do, actually." She set her carpet bag down, looked around the kitchen with practiced eyes. "You're giving me shelter. The least I can do is earn it. Besides," she added, moving toward the stove, "I suspect you and Lily have been eating bachelor food for too long." Grant opened his mouth, closed it, seemed to wrestle with his pride for a moment. Then he just nodded and moved toward the door. "I've got work to finish in the shed," he said. "Holler if you need anything." He was gone before Evelyn could respond, the door closing behind him with careful finality. She stood in the empty kitchen, listening to Lily singing at the pump outside, feeling the weight of this strange day settle on her shoulders like wet wool. Then she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The pantry was better stocked than she'd expected. Flour, salt, a little precious sugar, dried beans, a few wizened potatoes, half a wheel of cheese wrapped in cloth. Evelyn found bacon fat in a jar, onions in a basket, eggs from the chickens. Not much, but enough. She'd made meals from less. By the time Lily came back hauling the water bucket, Evelyn had a fire going in the stove and potatoes peeled in a bowl. The girl's eyes went wide. "You're really cooking?" she breathed like she was witnessing something miraculous. "I said I would." Evelyn took the bucket, poured water into a kettle. "Can you set the table? 3 places." "3," Lily repeated, wonder in her voice. "We haven't set 3 places since—" She trailed off, suddenly quiet. Evelyn crouched down to the girl's level, meeting those bright gray-green eyes. "Since your mama died?" Lily nodded, her small face solemn. "Papa says it hurts too much to remember, but I don't want to forget. Is that bad?" "No, honey, that's not bad at all." Evelyn smoothed a strand of tangled hair back from Lily's face. "Remembering the people we love is never bad, even when it hurts. Did you love your husband, the one who died?" The question was so direct, so innocent, that Evelyn almost laughed. "I barely knew him. We were married 3 weeks before he shipped out, but I think I could have loved him, given time." "Papa loved Mama," Lily said quietly. "He loved her so much that when she died, part of him died too. That's what Mrs. Patterson says. She says Papa's got a dead heart now." "Mrs. Patterson talks too much," Evelyn said firmly. "Your Papa's heart isn't dead. It's just bruised. Hearts can heal, you know. They're tougher than people think." "Is your heart bruised too?" Evelyn sat back on her heels, studying this too perceptive child with her matted hair and her patched dress and her eyes that saw too much. "Yes," she admitted. "My heart's bruised too." "Then maybe," Lily said slowly, working through the logic like a puzzle, "maybe that's why you're supposed to be here. Maybe God sent you so we could help each other's hearts feel better." Before Evelyn could respond, the door opened and Grant stepped inside, shaking rain from his hat. The storm had arrived in earnest now, drumming on the roof, turning the world beyond the windows into gray sheets of water. "Supper's almost ready," Evelyn said, standing quickly, wiping her hands on her apron. When had she put on an apron? It must have been hanging on the hook, and she'd put it on without thinking, like this was her kitchen, like she belonged here. "I hope you don't mind. I found everything in the pantry." Grant stared at the stove, at the table Lily was carefully setting, at Evelyn standing in his kitchen wearing his dead wife's apron. His face was unreadable, carved from stone. "You didn't have to," he said, his voice rough. "I know, but I did anyway." They ate in near silence, just the sound of forks on plates, and rain on the roof, and Lily's occasional happy hum. The food was simple: fried potatoes with bacon and onions, scrambled eggs, bread toasted on the stove, but Grant ate like a man who'd forgotten what a proper meal tasted like. He didn't say it was good, didn't thank her, but he finished everything on his plate and didn't object when Evelyn served him seconds. After supper, while Grant retreated to the porch to smoke his pipe and watch the storm, Evelyn heated water and washed the dishes. Lily hovered nearby, chattering about school and her friends and the creek where she liked to catch frogs. When the dishes were done, Evelyn noticed a basket of mending in the corner. Torn shirts, trousers with blown knees, Lily's dresses with hems coming down. "Do you mind?" she asked the girl, gesturing to the basket. "You want to fix those?" Lily's eyes went wide. "Papa always says he'll get to it, but he never does." "Well, I'm here now. Might as well be useful." She settled into the worn chair by the lamp, needle and thread in practiced hands, and set to work. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the lamp burned warm and steady. Lily curled up at Evelyn's feet, her head resting against Evelyn's knee, and slowly drifted off to sleep. Grant came back in when the storm finally broke, shaking water from his hair. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. Evelyn mending in the lamplight, his daughter asleep at her feet, the kitchen clean and the dishes put away, and the whole cottage feeling like a home instead of just a house. "I should put her to bed," he said quietly. "I can do it," Evelyn offered, "if you'll show me where." Grant hesitated, then nodded. He scooped Lily up with the easy strength of a man who'd done this 1,000 times, and Evelyn followed him up the narrow ladder to the loft. The space under the eaves was just big enough for a small bed and a trunk, with a rag rug on the floor and a window looking out at the rain-washed prairie. Grant laid Lily down gently, pulled a quilt over her. The girl stirred, mumbled something, then settled. For a moment, Grant just stood there looking down at his daughter, his face soft in a way it hadn't been all day. "She's a lovely child," Evelyn whispered. "She's all I've got," Grant said, so quiet she almost didn't hear. Then he turned and climbed back down the ladder, leaving Evelyn alone with the sleeping girl in the rain. When Evelyn came back down, Grant was standing by the window, staring out at the darkness. The lamp cast long shadows across the room. "Thank you," he said without turning around. "For supper, for the mending, you didn't have to do any of that." "I know." Evelyn picked up the basket of mending, found a shirt with a torn sleeve. "But I'm here, and I might as well be useful. It's how I'm made." "You're used to it, aren't you? Being useful. Making yourself indispensable so people will let you stay." The words should have stung, but they didn't. They were too true. "Yes," Evelyn said simply. "I'm used to it." Grant finally turned to look at her, and in the lamplight his face seemed younger, less guarded. "I'm sorry. That was unkind." It was honest. There's a difference. They stood there in the quiet cottage, the rain easing now to a gentle patter, and something passed between them. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition. Two people marked by loss, carrying grief like stones in their pockets, trying to figure out how to keep living when the people they'd loved were gone. "One night," Grant said, but it sounded like a question now instead of a statement. "One night," Evelyn agreed, though neither of them quite believed it anymore. She worked until the mending was done, until her eyes ached from the dim light and her fingers were sore from the needle. Grant sat at the table, pretending to read, but mostly just watching her work, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. When Evelyn finally stood and stretched, Grant showed her to the spare room, barely big enough to turn around in, with a narrow bed and a chair and a window the size of a book. But the sheets were clean and the blanket was warm, and after sleeping in train stations and cheap hotels, it felt like a palace. "Tomorrow," Grant said from the doorway, "we'll figure something out. Find you work, maybe. A proper place to stay." "Tomorrow," Evelyn echoed. But as she lay in the narrow bed listening to the last of the rain, she couldn't help thinking about Lily's bright eyes and Grant's careful grief and the way the cottage had felt like a home for just a few hours. She couldn't help thinking that maybe, just maybe, being unwanted at the train station was the best thing that had ever happened to her. Outside, the storm rolled away across the prairie, leaving the sky washed clean and full of stars. And in Cedar Crossing, a town that had watched a woman be abandoned on a platform just that morning, 3 people slept under one roof, a widower, a motherless child, and an unclaimed bride, and dreamed of tomorrow. Morning came soft and golden through the small window, and Evelyn woke to the sound of voices in the kitchen, Lily's bright chatter and Grant's lower rumble, the ordinary music of a household coming to life. For a moment, still caught in that hazy space between sleeping and waking, she forgot where she was. Then memory returned. Cedar Crossing, the empty platform, the little girl who'd called her mama, the one night of charity that was supposed to end today. She dressed quickly in the same clothes she'd worn yesterday, she had nothing else clean, and emerged from the tiny room to find Lily sitting at the table swinging her legs, while Grant stood at the stove attempting to fry eggs. The smell of scorched butter filled the air. "You're awake!" Lily bounced off her chair and rushed over, grabbing Evelyn's hand. "Papa's making breakfast, but he's not very good at it. The eggs are all brown and crusty." "Lily," Grant said, a warning in his voice, though his ears had gone slightly red. "Well, they are," his girl insisted. "Mrs. Ward can probably make them better. Can't you, Mrs. Ward?" Evelyn looked at Grant's stiff shoulders, at the pan smoking slightly on the stove, at the fierce pride and embarrassment warring on his face. She understood men like him, Men who'd rather burn the house down than admit they needed help. "I'm sure your papa's eggs are just fine," she said diplomatically, "but if you'd like, I could make some biscuits to go with them. I noticed you had buttermilk in the cold box." Grant turned, spatula in hand, and she watched him wrestle with his pride. Finally, he stepped back from the stove. "I'd be obliged," he said stiffly, "if it's no trouble." No trouble at all. They worked in careful silence, moving around each other in the small kitchen like dancers learning new steps. Grant salvaged what he could of the eggs while Evelyn mixed flour and buttermilk and butter with quick, practiced hands. Lily watched from the table, chin propped on her fists, a small smile playing at her lips like she was watching something wonderful unfold. The biscuits came out of the oven golden and steaming, and this time when they sat down to eat, the silence was more comfortable. Grant even managed a small nod of approval after his first bite, which Lily immediately translated into enthusiasm. "These are the best biscuits I've ever had," the girl announced. "Even better than Mama's, and Papa always said hers were the best in the county." The moment the words left her mouth, the air went tight. Lily's face crumpled, realizing what she'd said. Grant's jaw clenched so hard Evelyn could see the muscle jump. "I'm sorry, Papa," Lily whispered. "I didn't mean—" "It's fine," Grant said, but his voice had gone flat. "Finish your breakfast. You'll be late for school." The rest of the meal passed in painful quiet. As soon as Lily cleaned her plate, she grabbed her slate and reader and fled out the door with barely a goodbye. Grant stood abruptly, carried his dishes to the wash basin, and stood there with his hands braced on the counter, his back to Evelyn. "I should go," Evelyn said quietly, "like we agreed. One night." "And where exactly will you go?" Grant didn't turn around. "Did a job appear overnight? Did the boarding house suddenly start taking unclaimed brides?" "I'll figure something out. I always do." "Will you?" Now he turned and his eyes were hard. "Or will you end up in the saloon serving drinks to men who'll treat you like you're for sale? Or worse, actually for sale in one of the cribs behind it? Because that's what happens to women with nowhere to go in towns like this." Evelyn felt her cheeks burn. "I would never." "I know you wouldn't. But the town doesn't know that. They just know you're a woman who got abandoned, who has no money and no prospects. You think they'll see you as respectable? You think any decent establishment will hire you? So what are you suggesting? That I stay here?" She heard her voice rising, felt anger mixing with desperation. "You made it very clear this was temporary. One night you said, 'Don't make it into more than it is,' you said." Grant ran his hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "I know what I said, but Lily—" He stopped, seemed to wrestle with himself. "Lily barely slept last night. She kept waking up, checking to make sure you were still here. She's convinced you're some kind of answer to her prayers, and if you just disappear—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "So I should stay because leaving would hurt your daughter's feelings." Evelyn tried to keep the bitterness from her voice and failed. "I won't be someone's charity case, Mr. Mercer. I won't be the poor, pathetic woman you keep around out of pity." "It's not pity." The words came out harsh. "It's—" He stopped again, seemed to search for the right words. "Look, I need help around here. The house is falling apart. Lily's running half wild, and I can barely keep up with my carpentry work as it is. If you stayed, just for a while, just until you found something better, you could help with the house, with Lily. I'd pay you. Not much, but something. Room and board, and a small wage." Evelyn stared at him. "You want to hire me as your housekeeper?" "I'm offering you honest work," Grant said. "A roof over your head, 3 meals a day, and wages you can save until you find something better. It's more than you've got now." He wasn't wrong, and they both knew it. Evelyn looked around the cottage, at the dishes piled in the wash basin, at the floor that needed sweeping, at the mending basket that was somehow full again despite her work last night. She thought about Lily's bright eyes and the way the little girl had slept with her head on Evelyn's knee. She thought about standing on that platform yesterday, watching pity and scorn ripple through the crowd. "For how long?" she asked finally. Grant shrugged. "Until you don't need it anymore. Until you find better. Until—" He didn't finish, but something in his eyes said, "Until Lily stops looking at you like you hung the moon." "What will people say? An unclaimed bride living under your roof? Let them say what they want. This is my house. Besides, he added with a bitter smile, they already think the worst of me. Dead heart, remember? Can't get much worse than that. Evelyn studied him, this hard-edged man with his storm-gray eyes and his careful grief, offering her the one thing she needed most, a place to belong, even temporarily. She knew it was practical, knew he was solving a problem more than making a kindness, but sometimes practical was all you could hope for. All right, she said. I'll stay, but I earn my keep, understand? I'm not charity. Understood. Grant held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Evelyn shook it. His grip was calloused and strong, the handshake of a man who made his living with his hands. I've got work at the Hendersons' place today, building them a new chicken coop. I'll be gone until supper time. I'll have supper ready. He nodded, grabbed his tool bag from beside the door, and was gone before she could say anything else. Evelyn stood in the suddenly empty cottage, listening to his footsteps fade, and wondered what exactly she'd just agreed to. Then she rolled up her sleeves and set to work. By the time Lily came home from school that afternoon, the cottage had been transformed. The floor was swept and scrubbed, the dishes washed and put away, the windows cleaned until they sparkled. Evelyn had found a wash tub in the shed and done all the laundry, hanging it on a line strung between two posts in the yard. She'd mended the rest of the clothes in the basket, darned socks, patched trousers. She'd even tackled the stove, scrubbing away months of accumulated grease and ash until the black iron shone. The pantry was a different matter. Evelyn had taken stock and realized that while Grant kept the basics on hand, he was living meal to meal, buying only what he needed for that day or the next. There was no planning, no preserving, no thought for the winter ahead. The garden out back was struggling, weeds choking the vegetables, fence falling down, plants dying of thirst. She was in the yard trying to resurrect a row of beans when Lily came tearing around the corner of the house, her face lit up like Christmas morning. "You're still here!" The girl threw herself at Evelyn, nearly knocking her over. "I was afraid you'd be gone. Jenny Morrison said her papa said you'd probably run off by now, but I told her she was wrong. I told her you'd stay." Evelyn caught the child, steadied them both. "I'm staying for a while. Your father hired me to help around the house." "He did?" Lily pulled back, eyes wide. "Really and truly? You're not leaving?" "Not yet." Evelyn smoothed the girl's tangled hair. "But Lily, you need to understand this is just temporary. Just until I can find something more permanent. I'm not your mama. I can't be." "I know," Lily said, but something in her eyes said she didn't believe it, said she'd already decided how this story would end. "But you're here now. That's what matters." Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to make the girl understand that hope was dangerous, that counting on things rarely worked out. But Lily was already chattering about her day at school, pulling Evelyn toward the garden, asking what they could plant and could they have carrots because she loved carrots, and maybe some pumpkins for Halloween. They worked in the garden until the sun started sinking, Lily talking nonstop while Evelyn pulled weeds and tried to save what she could. The girl had a gift for conversation, filling every silence with observations and questions and stories. Evelyn learned that Lily's best friend was Sarah Chen, whose parents ran the general store, that her teacher, Miss Abernathy, was nice but strict, that she missed her mama most at bedtime when no one sang to her anymore. "Papa tries," Lily said, yanking at a stubborn weed. "But he doesn't know the words. Mama used to make up songs about everything, about the chickens and the garden and the stars. Papa says he can't remember them." "Maybe he remembers," Evelyn said softly. "Maybe it just hurts too much to sing them." Lily considered this, her small face serious. "Do you think Mama knows I still love her, even though I want you to stay?" Evelyn's throat went tight. She set down her trowel and turned to face the girl fully. "Lily, loving someone new doesn't mean you stop loving someone who's gone. Your heart's big enough for both. Your mama knows that. I'm sure of it. Jenny Morrison says it's wrong to want a new mama when your old one died. She says I'm being disrespectful." "Jenny Morrison," Evelyn said firmly, "needs to mind her own business. You're not being disrespectful. You're just a little girl who misses having a mother. That's not wrong. That's human." Lily threw her arms around Evelyn's waist and held on tight. Evelyn let herself hold the child back, let herself feel the ache of it, this little girl's desperate need, this temporary belonging, this dangerous hope that things might work out. They were still in the garden when Grant came home, his shirt dusty and his tool bag slung over one shoulder. He stopped at the sight of them, Lily chattering, Evelyn laughing at something the girl said, both of them dirt-streaked and happy in the late afternoon sun. Something crossed his face, too quick to read, before his expression went carefully neutral. "You've been busy," he said, looking at the clean windows, the laundry snapping on the line. "I told you I'd earn my keep." Evelyn stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Supper's ready, just needs warming. You didn't have to—" "Yes, I did. That was the agreement." They ate together as the last light faded. Venison stew Evelyn had made from meat she'd found in the cold box. Biscuits left from breakfast, greens from the garden. Grant ate with that same focused intensity as the night before, like good food was a revelation he'd forgotten existed. Lily kept up her steady stream of conversation, telling her father everything about her day, about what she and Mrs. Ward had planted, about Jenny Morrison being wrong about everything. After supper, while Grant retreated to his workshop to finish a project, Evelyn heated water for washing. She was elbow-deep in suds when Lily appeared at her side with a hairbrush. "Will you brush my hair?" the girl asked shyly. "Mama used to brush it every night, but Papa doesn't know how. He just ties it back and it gets all tangled." Evelyn's hand stilled in the water. This was dangerous territory, taking over small rituals, filling spaces meant for someone else. But Lily's hair was a genuine rat's nest, and the hope in the child's eyes was impossible to deny. "All right," she said, "but we need to be gentle. This might take a while." They sat on the porch in the last of the twilight, Lily between Evelyn's knees, while Evelyn worked through the tangles with patient fingers. The girl's hair was thick and dark, matted in places where it hadn't been properly brushed in months. Evelyn worked slowly, carefully, starting from the ends and working up, the way her own mother had taught her a lifetime ago. "Mama used to tell stories while she brushed," Lily said softly, "about princesses and dragons and magic. What kind of stories do you like best?" "The ones where people get saved, where someone comes just when everything seems hopeless and makes it all better." Evelyn's hand stilled for a moment. "Life isn't always like that, honey. Sometimes people have to save themselves. But sometimes they do get saved, right? Sometimes someone does come." Evelyn thought about the platform yesterday, about Lily's small voice saying, "That's my mama," about this accidental refuge in a carpenter's cottage at the edge of a prairie town. "Sometimes," she admitted, "sometimes they do." By the time Grant emerged from his workshop, Lily's hair hung in a smooth, dark waterfall down her back, and the girl was half asleep against Evelyn's knee. Grant stopped in the doorway, something unreadable crossing his face. "I'll carry her up," he said quietly. He scooped his daughter up with practiced ease, and Evelyn watched them disappear into the house. She stayed on the porch, listening to the crickets, watching the stars emerge, trying not to think about how natural this all felt, how easy it would be to forget this was temporary. Grant came back down and joined her on the porch, settling onto the steps with a tired sigh. For a long moment they sat in silence, the comfortable quiet of two people too exhausted for conversation. "Thank you," Grant said finally, "for her hair, for everything today. You're paying me to do it. Still, it's more than—" He trailed off, shook his head. "It's more than it's been." Evelyn wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his posture, the way his shoulders curved forward, the way he stared out at the dark prairie, made her hold her tongue. They sat together as the night deepened, and Evelyn thought about one night becoming two, about temporary becoming something else, about the dangerous business of letting yourself hope. The next morning, Evelyn woke to find a small stack of coins on the kitchen table, her first week's wages, paid in advance. Grant was already gone, off to another carpentry job, and Lily was still sleeping. Evelyn counted the money twice, feeling the weight of it in her palm. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Earned, not given. Real wages for real work. She made breakfast, woke Lily, sent the girl off to school with the lunch pail she'd packed. Then she headed into town, the coins tucked safely in her pocket, to see what Cedar Crossing looked like in the clear light of day. The main street was busy with morning traffic, wagons and horses, women with baskets, men heading to work. Evelyn kept her head up and her spine straight, refusing to flinch under the stares that followed her. She knew what they saw: the unclaimed bride, the charity case, the woman living under Grant Mercer's roof without benefit of marriage. At the general store, the proprietress, a plump woman with shrewd eyes, looked up from her counter as Evelyn entered. "Mrs. Ward," the woman said, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm Margaret Chen. What can I do for you?" "I need some supplies." Evelyn pulled out her list. "Flour, sugar, salt, some vegetable seeds if you have them, and thread, good strong thread for mending." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly as she looked at the list. "Planning to stay a while then?" "I'm working for Mr. Mercer," Evelyn said evenly. "Keeping house, looking after his daughter." "I see." Margaret began pulling items from the shelves, and Evelyn couldn't tell if the woman's tone implied approval or judgment. "That little girl could use a woman's hand. Grant does his best, but a father can only do so much." "She's a wonderful child." "She is that." Margaret wrapped the flower in brown paper, tied it with string. "Her mama was my good friend." "Sarah." That was her name. "She died bringing their second child into the world. Baby died too. Like to killed Grant, losing them both. He's not been the same since." Evelyn absorbed this information, understanding Grant's careful grief a little better. "I can't imagine." "No, I don't suppose you can, unless you've lost someone that way." Margaret's eyes sharpened. "I heard you're a widow, war widow?" "Yes." "Then maybe you understand more than most." The woman tallied up Evelyn's purchases. "That'll be $2.30. Evelyn paid, counted her change carefully. Margaret watched her with those shrewd eyes, and Evelyn had the sense of being assessed, weighed, measured against some invisible standard. "My Sarah is friends with Lily," Margaret said as she wrapped the last of the parcels. "Comes over to play most afternoons. You seem like a decent woman, Mrs. Ward, but decent or not, you should know people are talking. About you staying at Grant's place. About what it looks like. Let them talk." Evelyn picked up her parcels. "I'm doing honest work for honest wages. If that's not good enough for Cedar Crossing standards, then Cedar Crossing can go hang." Margaret's mouth twitched. It might have been the start of a smile. "You've got spine. That's good. You'll need it. This town can be particular about propriety." "Every town is particular about propriety, Mrs. Chen, especially where women are concerned." "True enough." Margaret came around the counter, lowered her voice. "For what it's worth, I think you're good for them. Grant and Lily. They've been half alive since Sarah died. Maybe you can help them find their way back to the living." "I'm not here to fix anyone," Evelyn said quietly. "I'm just here to work." "Maybe, but sometimes just showing up is enough." Evelyn left the store with her parcels and Margaret's words echoing in her head. She walked past the saloon, past the church, past the blacksmith's forge, where men stopped working to watch her pass. She felt their stares, heard the whispers, and kept her head high. Let them talk, let them judge. She'd been judged before, in every town she'd ever lived, and she'd survived it. She'd survived this too. Back at the cottage, she threw herself into work, scrubbing, organizing, making lists of everything that needed doing. The chicken coop needed repair, the fence needed mending, the garden needed serious attention. The cottage itself was sound, but it needed small touches. Curtains for the windows, cushions for the hard chairs, something to make it feel like a home instead of just a shelter. She was kneading bread dough when she heard voices outside. Through the window, she saw 3 women approaching the cottage, all dressed in their Sunday best despite it being Wednesday. Evelyn recognized the flour-dusted woman from the platform, the one who'd whispered behind her hand when Evelyn had stood there unclaimed. Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch, meeting them before they could reach the door. "Mrs. Ward," the leader said, her smile thin and sharp. "I'm Constance Patterson. I run the boarding house in town." "The one that doesn't take unclaimed mail-order brides," Evelyn said pleasantly. "I remember." Constance's smile tightened. "I see you found alternative accommodations." Mr. Mercer hired me as his housekeeper. Is there something I can help you with?" The three women exchanged glances. One of them, younger, with calculating eyes, spoke up. "We're from the Ladies' Moral Society. We concern ourselves with maintaining proper standards in Cedar Crossing." "How admirable," Evelyn said, her voice flat. "We're concerned," Constance continued, "about the appearance of impropriety. A single woman living under the roof of a widower without any proper chaperone or supervision. You must understand how this looks." "It looks," Evelyn said carefully, "like a man hiring help to run his household and care for his daughter. Unless you're suggesting something improper is happening, in which case I'd ask you to say it plainly." "We're not suggesting anything," the third woman said quickly. "We're simply concerned about Mr. Mercer's reputation. And yours, of course." "My reputation?" Evelyn almost laughed. "I was abandoned on a train platform 3 days ago in front of the entire town. I think my reputation is well past your concern." "All the more reason," Constance said primly, "why you should be careful. A woman in your position can't afford even the appearance of scandal." Evelyn felt anger rising, hot and sharp in her chest. "And what exactly would you suggest I do? Your boarding house won't take me. There's no hotel, no church housing. Mr. Mercer offered me honest work and I took it. If that offends your sensibilities, I suggest you take it up with him." "We certainly shall," Constance said, drawing herself up. "The Ladies' Moral Society has certain standards." "Then perhaps," a voice cut in from behind them, "the Ladies' Moral Society should concern itself with actual moral issues, like why 3 grown women have nothing better to do than harass someone trying to make an honest living." They all turned to see Margaret Chen striding up the path, a basket over her arm and fire in her eyes. She climbed the porch steps and stood shoulder to shoulder with Evelyn, facing down the 3 women with the confidence of someone who'd lived in Cedar Crossing her whole life. "Margaret," Constance said, surprise evident, "we didn't expect—" "No, I'm sure you didn't. I'm sure you thought you'd come out here and intimidate this poor woman into leaving so you could all go back to town and congratulate yourselves on maintaining standards." Margaret's voice dripped scorn. "Well, I've got news for you. Mrs. Ward is doing more for Grant and Lily Mercer in 3 days than any of you have done in 2 years. So unless you're planning to volunteer your own time to keep house and raise that little girl, I suggest you get off this porch and mind your own business." The 3 women stared, shocked into silence. Finally, Constance found her voice. "This isn't over," she said stiffly. "Yes," Margaret said flatly. "It is. Good day, ladies." They left in a flutter of skirts and offended dignity, their whispers carrying back on the wind. Evelyn sagged against the porch post, suddenly exhausted. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Margaret set her basket down. "Brought you some eggs for my chickens and some jam Grant's Sarah, used to love. Thought you might like it." She paused, studied Evelyn with those shrewd eyes. "Constance Patterson is all wind and no substance. Don't let her scare you off." "I'm not easily scared." "No, I don't suppose you are." Margaret smiled. "You'll do fine here, Mrs. Ward. Just fine." After Margaret left, Evelyn went back inside and finished the bread, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind churned. She thought about the women who'd come to drive her away, about Margaret who'd stood beside her, about the complicated web of reputation and propriety that governed women's lives in places like this. By the time Lily came home from school and Grant returned from work, the cottage smelled like fresh bread and simmering stew. They ate together in the lamplight, Lily chattering about her day while Grant listened with that careful attention he gave his daughter. And Evelyn sat at the table, earning her place one meal at a time, and tried not to think about how much she was starting to hope this temporary arrangement might last just a little bit longer. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm that felt almost like belonging. Evelyn rose before dawn to start the stove, made breakfast while Lily still slept, packed lunch pails and mended clothes and scrubbed floors until her hands were raw. Grant left early for his carpentry work and came home late, always tired, always quiet, always surprised to find hot meals waiting and a house that felt lived in. And Lily bloomed like a flower finally getting water, her laughter filling spaces that had been silent too long. But Cedar Crossing hadn't finished passing judgment. It started small, women pulling their children away when Lily tried to play, Conversations that stopped abruptly when Evelyn entered the general store, sidelong glances and whispered words that followed her down the street. Constance Patterson and her moral society hadn't given up. They'd simply changed tactics, spreading poison in careful doses, making sure everyone knew about the unclaimed bride living in sin under Grant Mercer's roof. Evelyn tried to ignore it. She'd weathered gossip before, knew that small-town talk was mostly wind, but this felt different, more persistent, like a noose tightening slowly around her neck. She saw it in the way the butcher's prices suddenly went up when she came to buy meat, in the way the seamstress claimed to have no work available when Evelyn inquired about extra employment, in the way even Margaret Chen looked apologetic when she told Evelyn that perhaps she shouldn't visit the store quite so often. "It's not that I agree with them," Margaret had said, her voice low and urgent, "but my husband's business depends on these people. If they think we're taking sides—" Evelyn had understood. In small towns, survival meant choosing battles carefully. She couldn't expect Margaret to risk her family's livelihood for someone who'd only been here a month. So Evelyn made herself smaller, quieter, less visible. She stopped going to town except when absolutely necessary. She kept to the cottage and the garden, to the safe spaces where no one could judge her. But the isolation wore on her, ground her down in ways the physical work never could. Then the fever came. It started with the Johnson twins, 7-year-old boys who woke up burning and shaking, their mother's screams bringing half the town running. By the next day, 3 more children had fallen ill. By the end of the week, it was sweeping through Cedar Crossing like wildfire, striking down children seemingly at random. The doctor took one look at the spots appearing on the sick children's skin, listened to their labored breathing, and climbed back on his horse. "Scarlet fever," he announced to the terrified crowd gathered outside the Johnson house. "There's nothing I can do. Keep them comfortable, pray for the best, and burn anything they touch. I'm heading to Cheyenne before this thing spreads further." He was gone before anyone could protest, leaving behind a town full of sick children and parents who didn't know how to save them. Evelyn heard about it from Lily, who came home from school pale and frightened. "Tommy Henderson is sick," the girl whispered, clutching Evelyn's skirt. "And Mary Patterson and the Miller baby. Mrs. Henderson was crying in the street. She said Tommy's burning up and she doesn't know what to do." Grant came home early that day to find Evelyn already packing a basket, clean rags, the good soap, what little willow bark she had left, a jar of honey. He stood in the doorway, watching her work with grim understanding on his face. "You're going to them," he said. Not a question. "Someone has to. The doctor said it's contagious, deadly." "I know what he said." Evelyn kept packing, her hands steady even as her heart raced. "I've seen fever before, Grant, during the war, in the field hospitals. I can't save them all, but I can help some. I have to try." "And if you catch it? If you bring it back here to Lily?" Evelyn's hands stilled. She turned to face him, saw the fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for his daughter, for the child who'd already lost one mother. "I'll be careful. I'll wash, I'll burn my clothes before I come inside. But those children are dying, and their parents are watching it happen because the doctor ran like a coward. I can't—" Her voice caught. "I can't just sit here and do nothing." Grant stared at her for a long moment, something working behind his eyes. Finally he nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Then I'm coming with you. Extra hands, extra supplies. We do this together." "Grant, you don't have to—" "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." They left Lily with Margaret Chen, who promised to keep the girls safe and away from the sick houses. Then Evelyn and Grant walked into the heart of the epidemic, carrying their meager supplies and whatever courage they could muster. The Henderson house was chaos, Tommy thrashing in his bed, his little sister crying in the corner, their mother wringing her hands and praying in desperate, broken whispers. Evelyn took one look at the boy's flushed face, the rash spreading across his chest, and felt a cold understanding settle in her bones. This was bad, worse than she'd thought. "Mrs. Henderson," she said firmly, cutting through the woman's prayers, "I need you to listen to me. We need clean water boiling constantly, cool cloths for his forehead and chest, small sips of water with honey every hour, even if he fights you. And we need to bring his fever down before it cooks his brain." "But the doctor said—" "The doctor ran. I'm here. Now either let me help your son or I'll leave and you can keep praying. Mrs. Henderson stared at her, shocked by the bluntness. Then she nodded, something like hope flickering in her desperate eyes. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening, Evelyn showing Mrs. Henderson what to do while Grant hauled water and boiled rags and did whatever heavy work was needed. Tommy's fever broke just after midnight, and though he was weak and pale, he was breathing easier. It wasn't a cure, but it was a chance. "How did you know what to do?" Mrs. Henderson asked, her voice hoarse from crying and praying. "The doctor said there was nothing." "There's always something," Evelyn said quietly. "It might not be enough, but there's always something." Word spread faster than the fever. By morning, people were appearing at Grant's door, begging Evelyn to come see their sick children. She went to every house that called, moving through Cedar Crossing like a ghost, barely sleeping, surviving on coffee and determination. Grant stayed by her side, carrying supplies, helping lift sick children, burning contaminated linens. They didn't talk much, there was no time for talking, but they moved together with the efficiency of soldiers in a war zone, each knowing what needed doing without having to ask. The town that had whispered about impropriety fell silent, too desperate to care about scandal. Constance Patterson herself came to the cottage on the third day, her face haggard, her perfect composure shattered. "My grandson," she said, the words barely audible. "Little William. He's burning up, and his mother is beside herself. I know we haven't been kind to you, Mrs. Ward, but please, he's only 5 years old, please." Evelyn looked at this woman who'd tried to drive her away, who'd spread poison about her character, who'd made her life in Cedar Crossing a daily trial. She saw the terror in Constance's eyes, the grandmother's love that transcended pride and propriety, and she picked up her basket. "Show me where he is." Little William Patterson was the worst case she'd seen yet. Delirious with fever, his small body convulsing, his breathing shallow and rapid. Evelyn worked on him for hours, cool cloths and willow bark tea, and whispered prayers she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. Grant held the boy down when the convulsions got bad, his strong hands gentle despite their strength. William's mother sobbed in the corner while Constance stood frozen, watching death circle her grandson like a wolf. "Talk to him," Evelyn told the mother. "Tell him stories, sing him songs. Keep him tethered to this world with your voice." "I don't know what to say," the woman whispered. What if these are the last words I ever say to him? Then make them count. Tell him you love him. Tell him you need him to stay. Tell him anything, just don't let him slip away into the silence." So William's mother talked, her voice breaking and mending and breaking again, telling her son about the pony they'd get him when he got better, about the fishing trips they'd take, about how much she loved him, how much she needed him, how he had to stay, he had to fight, he had to live. And slowly, impossibly, the boy's breathing eased. The convulsions stopped. His fever began to drop. When William opened his eyes just before dawn, clear and confused and asking for water, his mother collapsed into Evelyn's arms and sobbed so hard she couldn't breathe. Constance Patterson stood in the doorway watching, something broken and remade in her face. "Thank you," the older woman whispered. "Thank you." Evelyn just nodded, too exhausted for words, and moved on to the next house. But the fever wasn't done with Cedar Crossing yet. It kept spreading, kept claiming children despite Evelyn's best efforts. She saved more than she lost, but every death felt like a personal failure. A child she should have been faster for, smarter for, better for. Grant watched her run herself ragged, barely eating, hardly sleeping, moving from house to house like she could outrun the Reaper if she just moved fast enough. "You need to rest," he told her on the 5th night, finding her swaying on her feet in the Henderson kitchen, trying to mix another batch of willow bark tea. "Evelyn, you're going to collapse. I can't stop. There are still sick children, and you'll be no use to them if you fall over dead." He took the cup from her shaking hands. "Come home. Sleep for a few hours. The world won't end if you rest." "You don't know that," she said, but she let him lead her out into the night, too tired to argue. They walked back to the cottage in silence, the stars bright and cold overhead. Evelyn stumbled on the path and Grant caught her, his arms solid around her waist. She leaned into his strength without thinking, too exhausted to maintain the careful distance they'd kept between them. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, the words slurring with fatigue. "You could stay home, keep Lily safe. You don't have to be out here with me." Grant was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "My Sarah died in childbirth. I watched her slip away, and there was nothing I could do. Nothing. I've lived with that for 2 years, with the weight of being useless when it mattered most. So when you went out to save these children, when you didn't even hesitate..." He stopped, cleared his throat. "I guess I needed to do something useful for once. Needed to help instead of just standing by and watching people die." Evelyn tilted her head back to look at him in the darkness. She saw the grief still living in his eyes, the guilt that rode his shoulders like a weight he'd never be able to put down. She understood it, recognized it, because she carried her own version of the same burden. "You're not useless, Grant," she said softly. "You've saved more children this week than I could have saved alone. You've been..." She searched for the right word. "You've been essential." Something shifted in his face, some small easing of the tension he always carried. "So have you. More than you know." They stood there in the darkness, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and for a moment the walls they'd both built seemed thin as paper. Then Grant cleared his throat and stepped back, the moment breaking like glass. "Get some sleep," he said. "I'll wake you if anyone comes." Evelyn made it to her small room, collapsed onto the narrow bed fully clothed, and was asleep before her head hit the pillow. She dreamed of fever and death and small hands reaching for help she couldn't quite provide. She woke to screaming. It was Lily's voice, high and terrified, cutting through the fog of exhaustion like a knife. Evelyn was on her feet and running before she was fully awake, her heart hammering against her ribs. She burst into the main room to find Grant on his knees beside the settee where Lily lay curled in a ball, her small body shaking violently. "No," Evelyn whispered. "No, no, no." She dropped beside Grant, pressed her hand to Lily's forehead, and felt her world tilt. The girl was burning up, her skin hot enough to scald, her eyes glassy and unfocused. The fever had found its way into their house after all, had claimed the one child Evelyn would have died to protect. "When did this start?" Evelyn's voice was steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. "An hour ago, maybe less. She woke up crying, said her head hurt, and then..." Grant's voice cracked. "Then she started shaking, and I couldn't make it stop." Okay. Evelyn's mind raced, pulling up everything she knew about fever, about scarlet fever specifically, about what worked and what didn't. "We need cold water. All of it. And clean sheets. Move her to your bed. It's bigger. We'll have more room to work." They moved like a machine, each knowing what needed doing. Grant carried Lily up to the loft while Evelyn hauled water and gathered supplies. Her hands were steady, her movements efficient, but inside she was screaming. Not Lily. Anyone but Lily. "Please, God, if you're listening, not this child." The night stretched into an eternity of fear. Lily's fever climbed higher, higher than any Evelyn had seen. The girl thrashed and moaned, crying out for her mother, for her father, sometimes for Evelyn in a small voice that broke something in Evelyn's chest. They worked in desperate silence. Cool cloths changed every few minutes, willow bark tea dribbled between cracked lips, prayers whispered into the darkness. Somewhere around midnight, Lily's breathing changed. It went shallow and rapid, each breath a small struggle. Her lips started turning blue at the edges. Grant made a sound like a wounded animal, reached for his daughter with shaking hands. "Lily," he whispered. "Baby girl, stay with me. Please stay with me." But Lily's eyes were rolling back, her small body going limp, and Evelyn knew they were losing her. She'd seen this before, this moment when a fever turned from dangerous to deadly, when a child started slipping away into the darkness. She'd seen it, and she'd failed to stop it, and now it was happening to Lily, to this bright, beautiful girl who'd called her mama, who'd believed Evelyn could save her. "No." Evelyn grabbed Lily's face, held her steady. "Lily Mercer, you listen to me. You are not dying tonight. Do you hear me? You are not leaving your father. You are not leaving me. You are staying right here in this world because we need you too much to let you go. Evelyn, Grant's voice was thick with tears he was trying not to shed. Talk to her, Evelyn commanded. Tell her everything she needs to hear. Tell her now. So Grant talked. He told his daughter about the day she was born, about how she'd had a full head of dark hair and the loudest cry the midwife had ever heard. He told her about her mother, about Sarah who'd loved her so much, who died bringing her little brother into the world, but whose last words had been about Lily, about protecting Lily, about making sure Lily knew she was loved. He told her about the house he was going to build for her someday, with a big porch and a swing and windows that caught the morning sun. He told her about being scared when she'd pointed at Evelyn on that platform, about being angry that a stranger might take Sarah's place, and then about realizing that love didn't work like that hearts could grow to make room for new people without forgetting the ones who'd gone. And Evelyn worked while Grant talked, changing cloths, forcing water and medicine past Lily's lips, massaging the girl's small hands to keep blood flowing. She sang under her breath, old songs from her childhood, lullabies she'd heard other mothers sing, anything to fill the silence between Grant's words. She prayed in ways she hadn't prayed since the war, bargaining with God like a desperate merchant, offering anything, everything, her own life if necessary. Just please let this child live. The darkest hour came just before dawn, when Lily's breathing went so shallow it barely moved her chest. Grant pulled his daughter against him, rocking her like he had when she was a baby, his face buried in her damp hair. Evelyn knelt beside them, one hand on Lily's burning forehead, the other on Grant's shoulder, and they held vigil together over this child they both loved. "Mama," Lily whispered, so quiet Evelyn almost missed it. "Mama, don't let me die." The word "mama" hit Evelyn like a physical blow. This child who'd chosen her, who'd seen something in Evelyn worth hoping for, was calling her mama while death circled close. Evelyn leaned down until her forehead touched Lily's, until she could feel the girl's labored breath against her cheek. "I'm right here, baby," she whispered. "I'm right here. And I'm not letting go. You hear me? I'm not letting go." Grant's arm came around Evelyn's shoulders, pulling her against his side, and they held each other and Lily in a tight knot of desperation and love and terror. Outside, the first birds began to sing. The sky started to lighten. Dawn was coming, whether Lily lived to see it or not. Then, impossibly, miraculously, Lily took a deeper breath. Then another. Her eyelids fluttered. The terrible heat radiating from her skin began to ease, just a fraction, just enough to feel. "Her fever's breaking," Evelyn breathed, afraid to hope, afraid to jinx it. "Grant, I think her fever's breaking." Grant pressed his hand to his daughter's forehead, felt the change, and made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Oh God. Oh, thank God." They stayed like that, tangled together on the bed, afraid to move, afraid that any shift might tip the balance back toward darkness. But Lily kept breathing, kept cooling, kept staying. As the sun rose and painted the loft gold, the girl's eyes opened fully for the first time in hours. She looked at her father's tear-streaked face, then at Evelyn's, and managed a small, confused smile. "Did I get sick?" she whispered. "Yes, baby," Grant said, his voice breaking. "But you're okay now. You're going to be okay." "I knew I would be." Lily's words were slurred with exhaustion, but certain. "I knew Mrs. Ward wouldn't let me die." Evelyn felt tears streaming down her face. She hadn't even realized she was crying. She smoothed Lily's damp hair back, pressed a kiss to the girl's forehead, and let herself feel the overwhelming relief of a child saved, a prayer answered, a death cheated. Grant's hand found hers in the tangle of blankets and small limbs. He squeezed tight, his eyes meeting hers over Lily's head, and she saw everything he couldn't say written in his face. Gratitude and wonder, and something else. Something deeper. Something that made her breath catch. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." Evelyn could only nod, her throat too tight for words. They stayed there as the morning grew bright, watching Lily drift into real sleep instead of fever dreams, and neither of them wanted to let go. Not of Lily, not of each other, not of this moment when they'd stared into the abyss and somehow pulled themselves back. Outside, Cedar Crossing was waking up to another day of fever and fear. But in Grant Mercer's cottage, In the loft where morning light streamed through the window, three people who'd come together by accident had become something more permanent, something that felt dangerously close to family. And for the first time since stepping off that train, Evelyn let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found a place where being wanted wasn't a temporary gift, but something that might actually last. Lily slept through most of that day and into the next, her body exhausted from fighting the fever. Evelyn and Grant took turns sitting beside her, neither willing to leave the child alone for long, both needing the reassurance of watching her breathe. When Lily finally woke fully on the second morning, asking for water and complaining she was hungry, Grant laughed so hard he had to leave the room to compose himself. But the epidemic wasn't finished with Cedar Crossing yet. Even as Lily recovered, more children fell ill. Evelyn dragged herself back out into the houses despite Grant's protests, moving slower now, her reserves nearly spent. He came with her without asking, carrying supplies and doing whatever needed doing, and together they fought death house by house, child by child, winning more often than they lost, but feeling every loss like a knife to the gut. The town changed around them. People who'd crossed the street to avoid Evelyn now stopped to thank her with tears in their eyes. Mothers who'd pulled their children away from Lily brought pies and casseroles to the cottage, leaving them on the porch with notes of gratitude. Even Constance Patterson showed up one afternoon with a basket of fresh eggs and an apology so stiff it clearly pained her to deliver. "I was wrong about you," the older woman said, not quite meeting Evelyn's eyes. "About your character. About your place here. You saved my grandson's life. You've saved half the children in this town. Whatever I said before, whatever damage I caused to your reputation, She stopped, swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." Evelyn took the basket, felt the weight of it, the weight of everything unspoken beneath those words. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That means more than you know." "The Ladies' Moral Society met yesterday," Constance continued, her voice gaining strength. "We've decided to host a dinner in your honor, at the church, to properly thank you for everything you've done." "That's not necessary." "Yes, it is." Constance finally met her gaze, something fierce and determined in her eyes. "This town owes you a debt we can never repay. The least we can do is acknowledge it publicly. Saturday evening, 6 o'clock. Please say you'll come." Evelyn wanted to refuse, wanted to avoid being the center of attention, but she saw what this was: an offering, a public reversal of everything Constance had said about her, a chance to reclaim the reputation that had been systematically destroyed. "I'll be there," she said quietly. Constance nodded once, sharp and satisfied, then turned and walked back toward town with her spine straight and her head high, like she'd just accomplished something important. Grant came up behind Evelyn as she watched the older woman go. That couldn't have been easy for her. Constance Patterson doesn't apologize to anyone. "No, I don't imagine she does." Evelyn looked down at the basket of eggs. "Do you think it's real? The change in how people see me? Does it matter?" Grant's voice was gentle. "You didn't do what you did for their approval. You did it because it needed doing." "I know, but it's nice to think I might walk through town without people whispering behind their hands." Grant was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "There's still going to be talk, you know, about you living here, about what it looks like." "I thought we were past that. After everything, the fever gave everyone something bigger to worry about. But now that it's ending, now that life is getting back to normal, people will remember. They'll start wondering again about the propriety of it all." He paused. "I'm not saying they're right. I'm just saying the talk won't stop completely." Evelyn felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Are you asking me to leave?" "No." The word came out fierce and immediate. "God, no. I'm trying to figure out how to protect you from it, how to make sure this town treats you with the respect you deserve." "You can't control what people think, Grant." "I know, but there might be a way to stop them from thinking the worst." He didn't elaborate, just headed back toward his workshop with that look on his face that meant he was working through a problem. Evelyn watched him go and felt anxiety twist in her chest. She'd gotten used to this life, to the rhythm of days with Lily and Grant, to feeling useful and needed. The thought of losing it made her stomach churn. Saturday came too quickly. Margaret Chen arrived at the cottage in the afternoon with a dress draped over her arm, Deep blue calico with tiny white flowers, simple but beautifully made. This was Sarah's, Margaret said gently, seeing the question on Evelyn's face. Grant, Sarah. She'd want you to have it. For tonight. Evelyn touched the fabric, soft and well cared for. I can't. It's too much. You saved half the children in this town, including mine. A dress is nothing compared to that. Margaret pressed it into Evelyn's hands. Besides, you can't show up to your own honor dinner in a work dress with patches. Wear this. Make Sarah proud. So Evelyn wore Sarah's dress to the church that evening, with Lily bouncing beside her in a clean pinafore and Grant walking slightly behind them in his Sunday clothes, his jaw tight with tension. The whole town seemed to be there. Every family they'd helped, every child they'd saved, crowding into the small church hall where tables had been set up and covered with more food than Evelyn had seen in one place since before the war. Constance Patterson stood at the front, ringing a small bell to call everyone to attention. The room fell quiet, all eyes turning to Evelyn. We're gathered here tonight, Constance began, her voice carrying across the hall, to honor someone who showed this town what true Christian charity looks like. When our children were dying and our doctor fled, Mrs. Evelyn Ward stepped forward without hesitation. She moved from house to house, day and night, fighting death itself to save our babies. She asked for nothing in return. She expected no gratitude. She simply did what needed to be done because it was right. Evelyn felt her cheeks burning. She wasn't used to praise, wasn't comfortable being the center of attention, but Constance wasn't finished. I owe Mrs. Ward a particular debt, the older woman continued, her voice wavering slightly. My grandson William wouldn't be here tonight if not for her. She worked through the night to save him, and when I thanked her, she just moved on to the next child who needed help. That's the kind of person she is. Constance paused, looked directly at Evelyn. I also owe her an apology. When she first came to Cedar Crossing, I judged her. I questioned her character based on circumstances beyond her control. I made her feel unwelcome in a town where she'd done nothing but try to make an honest living. I was wrong. We were wrong. And tonight, we want to make that right. The room erupted in applause. People stood, turned to look at Evelyn with smiles and nods and eyes shining with gratitude. Lily grabbed her hand and squeezed tight, beaming up at her. Grant stood close behind them, his presence solid and steady. Speech, someone called out. Others took up the cry. Speech! Speech! Evelyn felt panic flutter in her chest. She wasn't good at speeches, wasn't good at putting feelings into words, but everyone was watching, waiting, and she couldn't just stand there silent. She took a step forward, cleared her throat. I don't really know what to say, she began, her voice shaking slightly. I'm not used to being thanked for doing what any decent person would do. When the fever came, I couldn't stand by and watch children die. I've seen too much death in my life already. I've stood helpless too many times. So when I had the chance to actually do something, to maybe save someone, I had to take it. She paused, looked around the room at all these faces that had once judged her and found her wanting. This town didn't owe me anything. When I stepped off that train 2 months ago, nobody wanted me. I was just another unclaimed bride, another woman who'd made bad choices and ended up with nothing. But Grant Mercer and his daughter gave me a chance. They gave me a place to belong, even temporarily, so if I saved your children, it's because they saved me first. She hadn't meant to say that last part. It slipped out unbidden, too honest, too raw. But looking at Grant's face, seeing something break open in his expression, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. The applause was thunderous. People surged forward to thank her personally, to shake her hand, to tell her about their children who were alive because of her. Evelyn smiled and nodded and accepted their gratitude with as much grace as she could manage, but her eyes kept finding Grant across the room. He stood watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch, and she knew something had shifted between them tonight, something neither of them could take back. The dinner was a warm blur of conversations and laughter, of children running between tables and mothers comparing notes on whose fever had been worst. Lily stayed glued to Evelyn's side, introducing her to everyone as my Mrs. Ward, with such pride that it made Evelyn's chest ache, and Grant hovered nearby, not saying much but always there, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos. As the evening wound down and people started heading home, Margaret Chen pulled Evelyn aside. "That was quite a speech," she said with a knowing smile. "Very honest." "Maybe too honest," Evelyn admitted. "I didn't mean to make it sound like you've fallen for Grant Mercer." Margaret's smile widened. "Honey, everyone in this room can see it. The question is what you're going to do about it." Evelyn felt heat flood her face. "I'm his housekeeper, that's all." "That's what you tell yourself. But the way he looks at you, the way he hasn't left your side all evening, that's not how a man looks at his housekeeper." Margaret squeezed her arm gently. "Sarah was my best friend. I loved her like a sister. But she's been gone 2 years, and Grant's been half dead with grief the whole time. Until you showed up. You brought him back to life, Evelyn. You brought them both back. I didn't do anything special, you stayed. When everything in you probably wanted to run, when this town made it clear you weren't welcome, you stayed and fought for a place here. That takes courage. That takes heart." Margaret glanced across the room to where Grant was helping Lily with her coat. "Don't waste it by pretending you don't want what's right in front of you." Before Evelyn could respond, Lily came bounding over, her face flushed with excitement. "Mrs. Ward, Papa says we can get ice cream on the way home. Real ice cream from the Mercantile." "Does he now?" Evelyn looked up to find Grant approaching, something soft and almost shy in his expression. "Seemed like a night for celebrating," he said, "if you're agreeable." They walked to the Mercantile in the warm evening air, Lily skipping ahead while Grant and Evelyn followed at a slower pace. The streets were quiet, most of the town still at the church, and for a few minutes it felt like they had Cedar Crossing to themselves. "You didn't have to say that," Grant said quietly. "About us saving you. It was kind, but you don't owe us anything." "I wasn't being kind. I was being honest." Evelyn glanced at him. "You gave me a place when I had nowhere to go. You let me earn my keep with dignity instead of making me feel like charity. You and Lily, you made me feel like I mattered, like I was worth something beyond just being useful." Grant stopped walking. Lily had disappeared into the Mercantile, leaving them alone on the street in the gathering dusk. He turned to face Evelyn fully, and in the lamplight his eyes were storm gray and intense. "You matter," he said, his voice rough. "You've always mattered. From that first night when you made supper and mended clothes like you'd always belonged there, you mattered. I tried to tell myself it was just gratitude, just relief at having help with Lily, but it's more than that. It's been more than that for a while now." Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. "Grant, I know this is complicated. I know people will talk. But Margaret was right when she said I've been half dead since Sarah died. I thought that was just how life was going to be from now on, going through the motions, taking care of Lily, waiting for time to pass. Then you showed up, and suddenly I could breathe again. Suddenly there were things to look forward to." He took a step closer. "I'm not asking you to replace Sarah. Nobody could do that. But maybe there's room for something new. Something that's just ours." Evelyn stared at him, afraid to hope, afraid this moment would shatter if she moved or spoke. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want you to stay, not as my housekeeper, not temporarily." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "I'm saying I want to do this properly, court you the right way, let people see that my intentions are honorable, and eventually, if you're willing, marry you. Make this family official." The word family hit Evelyn like a physical thing. She thought about Lily calling her mama, about Grant's steady presence, about mornings making breakfast and evenings on the porch, and all the small ordinary moments that had somehow become everything. "People will say you're settling," she whispered. "They'll say you could do better than an unclaimed bride who's past her prime. Let them say it. I don't care what people think." Grant's grip on her hand tightened. "You're brave and strong and kind. You saved my daughter's life. You saved this whole town. If that's settling, then I'll settle every day of my life and count myself lucky." "I'm scared," Evelyn admitted. "I've lost so much. Everyone I've ever cared about has left or died or disappeared. What if it works?" Grant's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. What if we get to be happy? What if this crazy thing that started with my daughter pointing at you on a train platform actually turns into something real and lasting? Is that what you want? Something real? That's all I want. He leaned in slowly, his forehead coming to rest against hers. Say yes, Evelyn. Say you'll let me court you properly. Say you'll give us a chance. Yes, she breathed, the word coming out like a prayer. Yes. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet and full of promise, right there on the main street of Cedar Crossing where anyone could see. And Evelyn kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, feeling like she'd finally found solid ground after years of drifting. They broke apart at the sound of Lily's delighted squeal from the mercantile doorway. "Papa's kissing Mrs. Ward! Papa's kissing Mrs. Ward!" Grant laughed, his forehead still pressed to Evelyn's. "So much for keeping this quiet." "I don't care," Evelyn said, surprised to find it was true. "Let the whole town know." They collected Lily and her ice cream and walked home through the summer night, the three of them together, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When they reached the cottage, Grant didn't retreat to his workshop or the porch. He stayed inside while Evelyn got Lily ready for bed, and when the girl was tucked in, he sat with them while Evelyn brushed out Lily's hair. "Are you going to be my real mama now?" Lily asked, her voice drowsy but hopeful. Evelyn and Grant exchanged glances. "Would you like that?" Evelyn asked carefully. "I knew it from the start," Lily said, nodding seriously. "I told you, I saw it in my dream. You were always supposed to be here. You were always supposed to be our family." "Well," Grant said, his voice thick, "I guess sometimes little girls know things their papas don't." "I always know things," Lily said matter-of-factly. Then she yawned, her eyes drifting closed. "I'm glad you finally figured it out." They stayed until she was fully asleep, then climbed down from the loft together. The cottage felt different now, charged with possibility, with the weight of what they'd admitted to each other. Grant walked Evelyn to her small room, both of them acutely aware of the new territory they were navigating. "I meant what I said," Grant told her at the door, "about doing this properly. I'm going to court you the right way. Take you to church socials, bring you flowers, let everyone see that I'm trying to win your heart." "You already have my heart," Evelyn said softly. "You've had it for weeks. I was just too scared to admit it." Grant smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and made him look years younger. "Then I guess I'm the luckiest man in Cedar Crossing. We'll see if you still think that when the gossip starts up again. Let it come. We'll weather it together." He kissed her once more, quick and chaste, then forced himself to step back. "Good night, Evelyn." "Good night, Grant." She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart still racing, a smile she couldn't suppress spreading across her face. Through the thin wall, she could hear Grant moving around the cottage, banking the fire, checking the locks. The ordinary sounds of a man settling his home for the night. But now they felt like her sounds too, her home, her life. The next morning, Grant was true to his word. He showed up for breakfast in his Sunday clothes, presented Evelyn with a handful of wildflowers he'd clearly picked on his way back from the workshop, and announced he was taking her on a proper walk through town after church. "Papa's courting Mrs. Ward," Lily announced to everyone within earshot at the church service, beaming with pride. He brought her flowers and everything. The news spread like wildfire. By the time the service ended, half the congregation was watching them with knowing smiles. Constance Patterson actually nodded in approval. Margaret Chen looked like the cat who'd caught the canary. And Grant kept Evelyn's hand tucked firmly in his arm, making it clear to anyone watching that his intentions were serious. They walked through Cedar Crossing in the Sunday afternoon sun, Lily running ahead to visit friends while Grant and Evelyn strolled at a leisurely pace. People called out greetings, stopped to chat, treated them like an actual couple instead of a scandalous household arrangement. It felt surreal and wonderful and terrifying all at once. "See?" Grant said quietly as they paused by the creek at the edge of town. "The world didn't end." "Give it time," Evelyn said, but she was smiling. "We've only been official for 12 hours. 12 hours, Grant repeated. "It feels like longer, like this was always how it was supposed to be." He was right. Standing there by the creek with Lily's laughter floating back to them and Grant's hand warm around hers, Evelyn felt something settle inside her, a rightness, a sense of finally being where she belonged. It had taken a lifetime of wrong turns and closed doors to get here, but somehow she'd ended up exactly where she was supposed to be. "What are you thinking?" Grant asked, watching her face. "I'm thinking," Evelyn said slowly, "that Lily was right. Maybe some things are meant to be. Maybe I was always supposed to end up on that train platform, standing there unclaimed, so your daughter could point at me and change everything." "I was so angry that day," Grant admitted, "when Lily said you were her mama. I thought she was making things up, trying to force something that couldn't be forced, but she saw what I couldn't, that you were exactly what we needed, what I needed. I needed you too, both of you. I just didn't know it yet." They stood there in the warm afternoon, watching the water flow and Lily chase butterflies, and for the first time in longer than Evelyn could remember, she felt genuinely happy. Not just content or surviving, but actually happy. It was a fragile, precious thing, this happiness, and she knew better than to take it for granted. Life had taught her that joy was temporary, that loss was always waiting around the corner. But standing there with Grant's hand in hers and Lily's laughter in her ears, Evelyn decided to be brave. She decided to hope. She decided to believe that maybe, just maybe, this time the story would have a happy ending. "Come on," Grant said, tugging her hand. "Let's go catch up to Lily before she finds some kind of trouble." They walked together toward their daughter, and it was their daughter now, in all the ways that mattered. And Evelyn thought about train platforms and fever nights and small hands reaching for help. She thought about being unwanted and becoming essential, about temporary shelters becoming permanent homes, about how the worst day of your life could somehow lead to the best. Cedar Crossing had judged her and dismissed her, and then, when it mattered, had seen her true worth. But more importantly, she'd found her own worth reflected in Grant's steady eyes and Lily's unshakable faith. She'd stopped being someone who just survived, and had become someone who belonged. And that, Evelyn thought as Grant pulled her close, and Lily came running back to them with wildflowers clutched in her fists, was worth every hard mile it had taken to get here. The courtship that followed was something Cedar Crossing had never quite seen before. Grant Mercer, the man who'd been silent and withdrawn for 2 years, suddenly became a fixture at every church social and town gathering, always with Evelyn Ward on his arm. He brought her flowers every Sunday, walked her home from the general store, sat beside her at community suppers with a proprietary air that made his intentions crystal clear. And Evelyn, the woman who'd once stood unclaimed on the platform, bloomed under his attention like the garden she'd coaxed back to life. But not everyone was pleased about the romance unfolding before their eyes. 3 weeks into Grant's courtship, Charles Dent finally returned to Cedar Crossing. Evelyn was at the Mercantile when she heard the commotion outside. Through the window, she saw a man dismounting from a fine horse, his clothes expensive, his manner confident as he greeted the men loitering by the saloon. Something about the way he held himself made her stomach twist with recognition even before Margaret Chen appeared at her elbow. "That's Charles Dent," Margaret said quietly, "the man who sent for you." Evelyn's hands tightened on the bolt of fabric she'd been examining. She watched through the window as Charles laughed at something one of the men said, throwing his head back like he didn't have a care in the world. This was the man whose letter had brought her west, whose lies had stranded her with nothing. This was the man who'd made promises and broken them without a second thought. "What's he doing back here?" Evelyn's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Who knows? Charles comes and goes as he pleases. Probably spent all his money in Denver and came crawling back." Margaret's eyes were sharp with concern. "You don't have to face him if you don't want to. I can have my husband send him away." "No?" Evelyn set down the fabric, straightened her spine. "He doesn't get to make me hide. Not anymore." She walked out of the Mercantile with her head high, and Charles Dent looked up at the sound of the door. His eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed with something that might have been calculation. He excused himself from his companions and sauntered over, his smile wide and insincere. "Evelyn Ward," he said, like they were old friends meeting by chance. "I heard you were still in town. I have to say, I'm surprised. I figured you'd have headed back east by now." "Did you?" Evelyn's voice was flat, devoid of the emotion churning in her gut. "That's interesting considering you're the reason I came west in the first place." Charles had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. About that, there was a misunderstanding. I got tied up in Denver with some business opportunities, and by the time you could get back, I'd been standing on that platform for hours wondering why the man who'd written me 3 letters full of promises couldn't be bothered to show up. Evelyn took a step closer, her voice dropping low and dangerous. Do you have any idea what it's like to be abandoned in public? To have an entire town watch you realize you're not wanted? Now, Evelyn, that's a bit dramatic. Don't! The word came out sharp as a whip crack. Don't you dare minimize what you did. You told me I'd want for nothing. You told me you were a man of means looking for a wife. You made me believe I'd finally found somewhere to belong, and then you left me with nothing. A crowd was gathering now, people stopping to watch the confrontation. Charles seemed to realize this wasn't going as he'd planned. He held up his hands in a placating gesture. Look, I admit I made some mistakes, but I'm here now, aren't I? We could start over. Give it another try. Start over? Evelyn stared at him in disbelief. You think I'd want anything to do with you after what you did? Well, it's not like you have better options, Charles said, his veneer of charm slipping. You're what, 30? 31? Not exactly prime marriage material, are you? I'm being generous here, offering you a second chance. She doesn't need your generosity. Grant's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He'd appeared from somewhere in the crowd, and now he stepped up beside Evelyn, his presence solid and protective. And she sure as hell doesn't need a second chance with a man who wasn't worth a first one. Charles looked Grant up and down, taking in the carpenter's rough clothes and calloused hands. And who might you be? Grant Mercer, the man who's going to marry her. The words hung in the air, and Evelyn's heart stopped. They hadn't talked about marriage specifically, hadn't made it official beyond the courtship. But Grant said it with such certainty, such finality, that it felt like a vow. Charles laughed, the sound ugly. You're marrying the carpenter? That's rich. What's he going to give you, Evelyn? A cottage and a garden? I could have given you a real life, a real house. You couldn't give her anything but broken promises, Grant said, his voice dangerously quiet. You're a coward who runs when things get difficult and comes back when it's convenient. Evelyn's worth 100 of you, and if you're too stupid to have seen that, then you don't deserve to speak her name. Charles's face flushed red. You've got some nerve, Mercer. Everyone knows you're just playing house with another man's mail-order bride. What kind of man takes someone else's... Grant moved so fast Charles didn't have time to finish. One moment they were standing apart. The next Grant had Charles by the shirt front, lifting him nearly off his feet. The crowd gasped. Someone shouted, but Grant's attention never wavered from Charles's suddenly pale face. Evelyn Ward is not anybody's property, Grant said, his voice carrying across the street. She's not a mail-order bride, not a charity case, not somebody's leftover. She's the woman who saved half the children in this town. She's the woman who turned my house into a home and my daughter's grief into hope. She's brave and strong and worth more than you could ever understand. And when she becomes my wife, it'll be because she chose me just like I chose her. Not because either of us had no other options, but because we want each other. You understand that? Charles nodded frantically, and Grant released him with a small shove. The man stumbled back, straightening his shirt with shaking hands. All his bravado evaporated. I think you should leave, Sheriff Morrison said, appearing from the edge of the crowd. Cedar Crossing doesn't have much use for men who abandon women. I'd hate for something unfortunate to happen while you're in town. It wasn't quite a threat, but it was close enough. Charles looked around at the hostile faces surrounding him, at the town that had once tolerated his presence but now clearly wanted him gone. He backed away slowly, then turned and practically ran for his horse. As he rode off, kicking up dust in his haste to leave, the crowd began to disperse, people murmuring to each other about what they'd witnessed. But Evelyn couldn't move, couldn't think beyond what Grant had just done, stood up for her in front of the whole town, claimed her publicly, defended her honor like it was worth defending. Grant, she said quietly, you didn't have to... Yes, I did. He turned to face her fully, his storm-gray eyes intense. Every word I said was true. You're not anybody's second choice, Evelyn. Not mine. Not ever. You said you were going to marry me. I know what I said. Grant took her hands in his. I meant it. I was planning to wait, to do this properly, with a ring and a proper proposal, But standing there listening to that bastard talk about you like you were damaged goods, I couldn't. I can't. I don't want to wait anymore." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "Grant, marry me," he said, loud enough for the remaining onlookers to hear. "Not because you need somewhere to live, or because Lily needs a mother, or because it's practical. Marry me because I love you, because I want to spend every day for the rest of my life with you, because you're the best thing that's happened to me and Lily since," his voice caught, "since we lost Sarah. And Sarah would want this. She'd want Lily to have a mother who loves her, and she'd want me to be happy again. So marry me, Evelyn, please." Evelyn looked at this man who'd given her shelter when she had nowhere to go, who'd fought beside her through the fever, who'd defended her honor without hesitation. She thought about Lily's bright eyes and morning breakfasts and the way the cottage felt like home now. She thought about being unclaimed on that platform, about how the worst moment of her life had led directly to the best. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I'll marry you." Grant pulled her into his arms right there on the main street of Cedar Crossing, and the remaining onlookers erupted in applause. Someone shouted congratulations, someone else called for a celebration, and through it all Grant held Evelyn close and whispered in her ear, "You're mine now, for real, forever." "Forever," she echoed, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. They were married 2 weeks later under the open prairie sky behind Grant's cottage. Their cottage now, Evelyn reminded herself, savoring the possessive. The whole town turned out for the wedding, cramming into the small yard and spilling out into the surrounding grassland. Margaret Chen had helped Evelyn make a new dress, cream-colored with blue embroidery, simple but beautiful. Grant wore his Sunday best, his hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving Evelyn's face as she walked toward him. And Lily stood between them wearing a crown of wildflowers, bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement, her role as flower girl already completed. When the pastor asked who gave this woman in marriage, Lily shouted, "I do!" before anyone else could speak, making the whole crowd laugh. The ceremony was short and simple. Grant's voice was steady as he made his vows, promising to love and cherish Evelyn for the rest of his days. Evelyn's voice shook slightly when she promised the same, overwhelmed by the reality of standing here making these vows, of being chosen and cherished and loved. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Grant cupped Evelyn's face in his calloused hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. The crowd cheered. Lily hugged them both so hard she nearly knocked them over, and for the first time in her adult life, Evelyn felt completely, unquestionably happy. The celebration that followed was loud and joyful, with music and dancing and more food than they could possibly eat. Grant kept Evelyn close, his arm around her waist, introducing her to everyone as "my wife" with a pride that made her blush. Lily flitted from guest to guest, telling anyone who would listen about how she'd known from the very beginning that Mrs. Ward, Mrs. Mercer now, was supposed to be her mama. As the sun began to set and guests started heading home, Constance Patterson approached the newlyweds with something that looked almost like shame on her dignified face. "Mrs. Mercer," she said formally, "I want you to know that the Ladies' Moral Society would be honored if you'd consider joining us. We could use someone with your compassion and practical sense." Evelyn blinked in surprise. The Ladies' Moral Society, the same group that had tried to run her out of town, was now inviting her to join. She glanced at Grant, who shrugged as if to say the decision was hers. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Patterson," Evelyn said carefully, "as long as we're clear that I won't be judging other women the way I was judged." Constance had the grace to look embarrassed. "Understood. We've learned some valuable lessons these past few months about judging books by their covers, about what truly makes someone worthy of respect." After the older woman walked away, Grant pulled Evelyn close. "You don't have to join if you don't want to. You don't owe them anything." "I know, but maybe I can help change things. Make sure the next woman who shows up unwanted isn't treated the way I was." Evelyn leaned into his embrace. "Besides, I'm a respectable married woman now. Might as well act like it." "Respectable," Grant repeated with a smile. "Never thought I'd see the day when you'd be respectable. Never thought I'd see the day when I'd want to be." They stayed in the yard long after the last guest had left, just the three of them, Grant and Evelyn and Lily, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Lily had finally worn herself out and was dozing against Evelyn's shoulder, her flower crown askew, her face peaceful in sleep. "I should carry her to bed," Grant said quietly, but he made no move to get up. They were sitting on a blanket spread across the grass, Evelyn nestled against Grant's chest, and the moment felt too perfect to break. "Just a few more minutes," Evelyn murmured. "I want to remember this exactly as it is." "It's going to be like this every day," Grant said. "You, me, Lily, this is our life now. I know, I just can't quite believe it's real, that I get to keep it." Grant was quiet for a moment, his hand making slow circles on her back. "You know what the hardest part was? After Sarah died? It wasn't the grief, though God knows that was bad enough. It was feeling like I'd failed her, like I should have been able to save her, should have done something different, anything to keep her alive. I carried that guilt for 2 years, let it eat me alive. And then you came along and saved Lily when the fever had her, and I realized sometimes there's nothing you can do. Sometimes death comes and takes what it wants, and all your guilt and blame won't change it. But sometimes, if you're lucky, life gives you a second chance, gives you someone who teaches you how to live again." Evelyn turned to look at him, saw the tears shining in his eyes. "She'd be proud of you, you know, Sarah, of how you kept Lily safe, how you opened your home to a stranger, how you learned to love again." "You think so?" "I know so. Because if I were gone and you'd found someone who loved our daughter the way I love Lily, I'd be grateful. I'd want you to be happy." Grant pressed his face into her hair, his arms tightening around her. "I love you, Evelyn Mercer. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too. Both of you." She looked down at Lily, still sleeping peacefully. "This little girl who pointed at me on a platform and decided I was supposed to be her mama, she saved my life. You both did." They sat there in the darkness, holding each other and their sleeping daughter, and Evelyn thought about all the paths that had led her here. The husband who'd died in the war, the jobs she'd lost, the landlords who'd evicted her, the countless times she'd been told she wasn't good enough, wasn't young enough, wasn't worth the trouble. Every closed door and rejection had led her to that train platform, to standing there unclaimed while the town watched. And that moment of public humiliation had brought her to this, a family, a home, a love she'd stopped believing was possible. "We should go in," Grant said eventually, when Lily had been asleep long enough that moving her wouldn't wake her. "It's getting cold." He carried their daughter inside while Evelyn gathered the blanket and the remains of the celebration. The cottage was dark, except for the lamp Grant had left burning in the window, a beacon guiding them home. Evelyn paused in the doorway, looking back at the prairie stretching endless under the stars, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. She'd traveled 3,000 miles to be unwanted, but in being unwanted, she'd found exactly where she was supposed to be. Inside, Grant was tucking Lily into her bed in the loft, murmuring something that made the girl smile in her sleep. Evelyn climbed up to join them, and together they stood looking down at the child they both loved, at the daughter who'd brought them together through sheer force of will and faith. "She was right," Evelyn whispered, "about the dream, about me being meant to come here." "She usually is," Grant said with a small smile. "Stubborn and usually right. Worst combination possible." They climbed back down, and suddenly the cottage felt different, charged with the knowledge that this was their wedding night, that everything between them was about to change. Grant seemed to feel it too, his movements careful as he banked the fire, as he checked the locks one final time. "Evelyn," he said, turning to face her in the dim lamplight, "I know this has all happened fast. If you need time, if you're not ready—" She crossed to him, took his face in her hands, and kissed him with all the love and desire and gratitude she'd been holding back. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she smiled at the dazed expression on his face. "I'm ready," she said simply. "I've been ready since the day you defended me to Charles Dent, since the night we saved Lily from the fever, since that first morning when you grudgingly let me stay for one night. I'm ready for all of it, Grant, for this life with you and Lily, for building something real and lasting, for being a family." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and they stumbled together toward the bedroom that was no longer just his, but theirs. The lamp burned low in the main room as they closed the door behind them, and the cottage settled into quiet contentment, sheltering the family that had found each other against all odds. Morning came soft and golden, and Evelyn woke wrapped in Grant's arms, his breathing slow and steady against her hair. For a moment she just lay there, savoring the warmth and safety and rightness of it. Then she heard small footsteps on the ladder and Lily's voice calling out, "Mama, Papa, are you awake? I'm hungry and I want to make pancakes, but I can't reach the flour." Evelyn felt Grant smile against her shoulder. "Welcome to married life," he murmured. "It's never quiet and it's never boring." "Sounds perfect," she said, meaning it completely. They dressed quickly and emerged to find Lily in the kitchen, standing on a chair trying to reach the high shelf where Grant kept the flour. Evelyn lifted the girl down gently, ruffled her tangled hair, and began pulling out what they needed for breakfast. "Did you and Papa have a nice wedding night?" Lily asked with the blunt curiosity of a child. "Are you happy?" "Very happy," Evelyn assured her. "The happiest I've ever been." "Good, because now you're stuck with us forever." Lily said it with such satisfaction that Grant laughed out loud. "Forever," Evelyn agreed, looking at her husband and her daughter, her family, and feeling her heart expand to hold all the love threatening to overflow. "I wouldn't have it any other way." They made pancakes together, the three of them working in easy coordination, and ate breakfast while the morning sun streamed through windows Evelyn had cleaned months ago. After breakfast, Grant had work to do, a barn to build for the Hendersons, and Lily had school, but they lingered over their meal, none of them quite ready to let the spell of the wedding break. Finally, reluctantly, Grant stood and grabbed his tool bag. He kissed Evelyn thoroughly, then kissed Lily's forehead and headed for the door. But he paused with his hand on the latch, turning back to look at his wife and daughter sitting at the table in the morning light. "I just want to say," he began, then stopped, emotion making his voice rough. "I want you both to know that I never thought I'd get this again. This feeling of home, of family, of having something worth coming back to every night. Sarah gave me that once, and losing it nearly killed me. But you, Evelyn, you gave it back. You took a broken man and a grieving child, and you made us whole again. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "You already are, Grant. You always have been." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and left for work. Through the window, Evelyn watched him walk away, his stride confident, his shoulders straight. He didn't look like a man carrying the weight of the world anymore. He looked like a man who'd found his way back to the living. "Mama," Lily said, pulling Evelyn's attention back to the table. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Do you think my first mama knows about you? About us being a family now?" Evelyn pulled the girl onto her lap, holding her close. "I think she knows, and I think she's happy about it, because she loved you so much, and she'd want you to have someone to take care of you, to love you the way she did." "Do you love me like that? Like she did?" "Oh, Lily." Evelyn pressed a kiss to the girl's dark hair. "I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. The moment you pointed at me on that platform and called me your mama, even though I was a stranger, even though I had no business being your mama, my heart knew. You were mine. You've been mine from that very first moment." Lily was quiet for a while, processing this. Then she said softly, "I'm glad God sent me that dream. I'm glad He showed me you were coming. So am I, baby. So am I." They sat there in the morning quiet, holding each other, and Evelyn thought about dreams and destiny, and the strange paths that led people to where they were meant to be. She thought about the letter from Charles Dent that had seemed like salvation, but had actually been abandonment. She thought about standing on that platform, watching pity and scorn ripple through the crowd, certain her life was over. She thought about how wrong she'd been. Her life hadn't ended that day. It had begun. The months that followed were full of the ordinary joys and challenges of building a life together. Grant's carpentry business grew as word spread about his skill and reliability. Evelyn joined the Ladies' Moral Society and quietly revolutionized their mission from judging others to actually helping them. Lily flourished in school, her confidence growing along with her reading skills. And the cottage that had once felt hollow and lifeless became a home filled with laughter and love and the comforting sounds of family. Cedar Crossing accepted them fully now. The whispers stopped, replaced by friendly greetings and invitations to socials. Evelyn made real friends, Margaret Chen chief among them, but others too, women who'd been suspicious at first but had learned to see past their prejudices. The town that had watched her stand unclaimed now watched her thrive, and slowly, grudgingly, they learned the lesson Lily had known from the start, that a person's worth had nothing to do with how they arrived and everything to do with what they did once they got there. One evening in late autumn, when the air had turned crisp and the prairie grass had gone gold, Evelyn sat on the porch watching the sunset while Grant worked in his shop and Lily played in the yard. She was mending one of Grant's shirts, her hands moving through the familiar motions when she became aware of Lily standing in front of her, staring intently. "What is it, sweetheart?" Evelyn asked, setting down her mending. "I was just thinking," Lily said slowly, "about that day at the train station. When I saw you standing there, what about it? Everyone said you were unwanted, that nobody claimed you, that you were all alone." Lily climbed onto Evelyn's lap, settling in like she belonged there. "But that's not really true, is it? Because I wanted you, I claimed you. You were never alone because I was waiting for you the whole time." Evelyn felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You're right. I wasn't alone. I just didn't know it yet." Do you think other people feel alone like that? When really they're not? When really someone's waiting for them? I think maybe they do. I think maybe we all feel alone sometimes, even when we're surrounded by people who love us. Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. Then we should help them, the people who feel alone. We should show them they're not. How would we do that? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out, because that's what families do, right? They help people. Evelyn hugged her daughter close, marveling at the wisdom contained in this small person. "Yes, sweetheart, that's exactly what families do." Grant emerged from his workshop as the last light faded from the sky, wiping sawdust from his hands. He took in the scene on the porch, his wife and daughter curled together in the rocking chair, and smiled in a way that still made Evelyn's heart skip. "What are my girls plotting?" he asked, climbing the steps. "World domination," Evelyn said lightly. "The usual." "Well, put it on hold for supper. I'm starving." They went inside together, the three of them, and Evelyn felt that same rush of gratitude she'd felt on her wedding night. This was her life now. Not perfect, not without challenges, but hers. Chosen, wanted, real. That night, after Lily was asleep and the cottage was quiet, Evelyn stood at the window looking out at the prairie stretched endless under the stars. Grant came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, rested his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About letters," Evelyn said. "About the letter Charles Dent wrote that brought me here, full of lies and empty promises. I've spent months being angry about that letter, about how it trapped me, how it ruined my life." She paused, turned in his arms to face him. "But tonight, I realized something. That letter didn't ruin my life. It saved it. Because if Charles had kept his promises, if he'd been waiting at that station like he was supposed to be, I would have married him. I would have spent my life with a man who didn't deserve me, who would have taken me for granted, who would never have loved me the way you do. That letter brought me here, to this exact moment, to this family, and I wouldn't change it for anything." Grant cupped her face in his hands, his storm-gray eyes intense in the lamplight. "You know what I think about sometimes? I think about what would have happened if I'd said no that day. If I'd let you walk away from the train station, let you find your own way. Lily would have been heartbroken, but we would have survived. We'd been surviving for 2 years, but I would have missed this. Us, this life, this happiness. I would have missed you, and that would have been the real tragedy." "We found each other," Evelyn said simply. "Against all odds, despite everything that should have kept us apart, we found each other. That has to mean something." "It means everything," Grant said, and kissed her with a tenderness that still had the power to take her breath away. Later, lying in bed with her husband's arms around her, and the sound of Lily's soft breathing drifting down from the loft, Evelyn composed one final letter in her mind. Not to Charles Dent, Not to any of the people who'd rejected her over the years, but to her mother, dead these 20 years, who'd taught her daughter to be strong and resilient and brave. Dear Mama, she thought, I know you worried about me after Papa died, worried I'd end up alone and struggling. I want you to know that I did struggle for a long time. I was alone and unwanted and convinced my life would never amount to anything. But then I came to a town called Cedar Crossing, and a little girl pointed at me and called me Mama, and everything changed. I have a husband now who loves me, who chose me not because I was convenient, but because he actually wanted me. I have a daughter who sees me as her miracle, who believed in me before I believed in myself. I have a home and a family and a purpose. I'm not just surviving anymore, Mama. I'm living, really, truly living, and I wanted you to know that. I wanted you to know your daughter found her way home. She felt Grant's arms tighten around her in his sleep, heard Lily sigh contentedly from the loft, and smiled into the darkness. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she imagined her mother smiling too, finally at peace, knowing her daughter was safe and loved and happy. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Evelyn woke to find Grant already gone to work, and Lily sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed and bouncing with excitement. Come on, Mama, the girl urged. We're going to be late for church, and I want to show you something at the schoolhouse after. Evelyn let herself be hurried through breakfast and into her Sunday dress, amused by Lily's impatience. They walked to church together, Lily skipping ahead and then circling back, too excited to walk in a straight line. After the service, as people gathered outside to chat, Lily grabbed Evelyn's hand and pulled her toward the schoolhouse next door. Inside, the teacher, Miss Abernathy, was putting up a new bulletin board. When she saw them, she smiled warmly. Mrs. Mercer, I'm so glad you're here. Lily wanted you to see this. She gestured to the board, which was covered in drawings and short essays by the students. At the top, in Miss Abernathy's careful script, it read, What I'm Grateful For. Lily dragged Evelyn to one particular essay, pointing at it with pride. It was Lily's handwriting, careful and deliberate, and it read, I am grateful for my mama who came on a train. Everyone said she was unwanted, but I knew she was exactly who we needed. She saved me from the fever, and she makes Papa smile again, and she brushes my hair every night and tells me stories. She says love doesn't run out, that there's always room for more. I'm grateful God sent me a dream so I would know to look for her. I'm grateful she stayed even when people were mean. I'm grateful she's my mama forever now. Evelyn felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. She pulled Lily into a fierce hug, overwhelmed by the love and acceptance and pure joy radiating from every word her daughter had written. I wanted everyone to know, Lily said, her voice muffled against Evelyn's shoulder. I wanted them to see how special you are. Oh, sweetheart, you're the special one. You and your papa both. You saved me just as much as I saved you. They stood there in the schoolhouse, holding each other while Miss Abernathy tactfully busied herself with other tasks. And Evelyn thought about all the times she'd been told she wasn't special, wasn't worth keeping, wasn't good enough. She thought about how wrong they'd all been, how one child's faith had been enough to prove it. When Grant came to collect them after finishing his morning's work, he found them still at the schoolhouse. Lily immediately dragged him over to read her essay, and Evelyn watched his face transform as he read their daughter's words. His eyes went bright with unshed tears, and when he looked at Evelyn, she saw everything she needed to know written in his expression. They walked home together through the autumn afternoon, Lily chattering about school and friends and the 1,000 small dramas of childhood. And Evelyn listened with half her attention while the other half marveled at this life she'd stumbled into, this family she'd been given, this love she'd stopped believing existed. That evening, as they sat down to supper and Lily said grace with her small hands folded and her eyes squeezed tight, Evelyn looked around the table at her family and felt something settle deep in her soul, a certainty, a rightness, a sense of being exactly where she was supposed to be. She'd come to Cedar Crossing as an unclaimed bride with nowhere to go and nothing to offer but her willingness to work. She'd stood on that platform watching pity and judgment ripple through the crowd, certain her life was over. But a little girl had pointed at her and called her mama, and in that moment, everything had changed. Now she was Evelyn Mercer, wife to Grant and mother to Lily. She was a respected member of the community, someone people turned to in times of trouble. someone whose opinion mattered and whose presence was valued. She was no longer unwanted or unclaimed or alone. She was chosen, treasured, loved beyond measure. And sitting there at the supper table in the cottage that had become her home, listening to Lily's prayers and feeling Grant's foot brush against hers beneath the table, Evelyn finally understood what it meant to belong. Not because someone had claimed her out of convenience or necessity, but because she'd proven herself worthy of being chosen. Because she'd stayed when it would have been easier to leave. Because she'd fought for a place in a town that hadn't wanted her and won the respect of people who'd dismissed her. But most importantly, because a little girl had looked at her with eyes full of faith and possibility and said, "That's my mama," and Evelyn had found the courage to believe it might be true. The meal ended, the dishes were washed, Lily was tucked into bed with her hair brushed smooth and her prayers said. Grant and Evelyn stood together on the porch in the gathering darkness, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, and watched the stars emerge one by one over the endless prairie. "Happy?" Grant asked quietly. "More than I ever thought possible," Evelyn answered honestly. "You?" "Happier than I deserve to be," he said, then amended when she started to protest. "Happier than I ever dared hope for." "Better?" "Much better." They stood there in the soft darkness, holding each other, content with the silence and the stars and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring more of the same, more ordinary joys, more small challenges, more moments of grace and gratitude and love. This was her life now, not perfect, but precious, not easy, but earned, not given, but chosen. And as the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead and the prairie wind whispered through the grass, Evelyn Ward Mercer finally, completely, let go of the woman who'd stood unclaimed on that train platform 3 months ago. That woman was gone, transformed by faith and courage and love into someone new, someone who belonged, someone who was home. The unclaimed bride had been claimed after all, not by a man with empty promises, but by a grieving widower and his motherless daughter who'd needed her just as much as she'd needed them. And in the claiming, in the choosing, in the staying, they'd all been saved.